The original PlayStation had one of the greatest JRPG libraries of all time. But when people look back at that generation, the conversation often revolves around the same massive franchises: Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Tales. So for this list, I want to look beyond those names and rank 10 PlayStation JRPGs that I think deserve your attention. Some of these are genuine hidden gems. Others, like Xenogears and The Legend of Dragoon, are well known among dedicated JRPG fans, but never reached the mainstream recognition of the biggest franchises. So let's start with number 10. Grandia is probably the least obscure game on this list, but there was no way I was leaving it out. What immediately stands out is its sense of adventure. Grandia really captures that feeling of setting out into an enormous unknown world, with a cast that grows and changes along the way. But the real highlight for me is the battle system. Instead of characters simply waiting for their turn, everyone moves along an initiative gauge. Certain attacks can delay or even cancel an enemy action, meaning that manipulating turn order becomes a major part of combat. Positioning matters too, because characters physically move around the battlefield to attack. It made Grandia's combat feel incredibly dynamic for a turn-based JRPG, and even today there aren't many games that handle battles quite like it. Luckily, Grandia hasn't been completely forgotten. Grandia and Grandia 2 received the Grandia HD collection, making both classics much easier to play on modern systems. At number 9 is Lunar 2 Eternal Blue Complete. Lunar 2 doesn't try to completely reinvent the wheel. Instead, it takes the traditional formula and executes it extremely well. It has a fantastic cast, plenty of humor, an emotional story, and some beautiful animated sequences that gave the game an enormous amount of personality on the original PlayStation. The relationship between Hiro and Lucia is at the center of the adventure, but what I really remember is how much personality the entire party has. And this is another classic that has recently been given a second chance. Lunar 2 returned alongside Lunar Silver Star Story in the Lunar Remastered Collection, with updated graphics and audio as well as quality of life improvements. So if you've never played Lunar 2, you fortunately no longer need an original PlayStation copy to discover it. Number 8 is Wild Arms 2. Wild Arms has always stood apart from most JRPGs because of its strange combination of fantasy, science fiction, and Wild West influences. And Wild Arms 2 takes those ideas in some very interesting directions. You have multiple protagonists, a large cast, dungeon puzzles that actually require you to interact with the environment, and the tool system gives different characters their own ways of solving those puzzles. Then there's Ashley's transformation into Night Blazer, which gives Wild Arms 2 one of its most memorable mechanics and visual designs. The original English localization certainly hasn't aged perfectly, but underneath it is an ambitious JRPG packed with ideas. Wild Arms is another franchise I would love to see properly return one day. At number 7 is Legend of Legaia, and this one has one of my favorite combat concepts on the PlayStation. Instead of simply selecting attack from a menu, you enter combinations of high, low, left, and right attacks. Discover the correct combinations, and your characters perform arts, with more powerful combinations becoming available as you progress. It almost feels like putting fighting game inputs inside a traditional turn-based JRPG. Then you have the Seru system, where certain enemies can be absorbed and later summoned as magic. Combine that with its darker world, memorable soundtrack, and the mystery surrounding the mist, and Legend of Legaia still feels remarkably different from most JRPGs of its era. It's exactly the kind of experimental battle system I wish more modern turn-based games would attempt. Number 6 is Arc the Lad 2. One reason I love this game is that it combines two things I rarely see together. You have a strategy RPG combat system, but you also have proper exploration. You're not simply moving from one battle map to another through a menu. You can travel between locations, explore towns and dungeons, and interact with the world like a more traditional JRPG before transitioning naturally into tactical battles. I would love to see more games use this structure. Arc the Lad 2 is also vastly bigger and more ambitious than the original Arc the Lad, expanding the world, cast, and systems while continuing its story. For anyone who likes tactical combat but sometimes finds the purely mission-based structure of strategy RPGs restrictive, Arc the Lad 2 is absolutely worth looking at. Number 5 is Breath of Fire 4. In some areas, I actually think Breath of Fire 4 improves on the third game. Visually, it is absolutely gorgeous. The sprite work and animation are some of Capcom's best from the PlayStation era, and its world has an incredibly distinctive atmosphere. Combat is refined as well, and once again you have systems like Masters allowing you to shape how your characters develop. But the biggest strength is probably its story. Following both Ryu and Fulu gives you two very different perspectives on the events taking place, and Fulu remains one of the most memorable characters in the entire series. So why is this below Breath of Fire 3? For me, one of the biggest issues is the camera. Breath of Fire 4 gave me one of the most frustrating camera experiences I can remember in a JRPG. Objects constantly obscure things you're trying to find, and rotating the camera around environments can turn simple exploration into a fight against the perspective. It's a relatively small mechanic on paper, but across an entire game it bothered me enough to push Breath of Fire 4 below its predecessor. Which brings us to number 4, Breath of Fire 3. This is my favorite Breath of Fire game. Its Dragon Gene system is still one of the coolest implementations of transformation mechanics I've seen in a JRPG. Rather than simply unlocking one dragon form after another, you discover different genes and combine them to create different transformations. Then there's the Master System, which lets characters train under different masters to alter their stat growth and learn new abilities. You can learn enemy skills, fish, explore optional areas, and experiment with how you develop your characters. And behind all those systems is a fantastic coming-of-age adventure with an incredibly memorable cast. Breath of Fire 4 may look more refined, but there's something about the systems, characters, and overall journey of Breath of Fire 3 that puts it slightly ahead for me. And it's genuinely a shame that Breath of Fire has now spent so long without a proper new entry. This is a series that deserves to come back. At number 3 is The Legend of Dragoon. This is one of those games where I still can't quite understand how Sony has never given it a proper remake or remaster. The addition system makes even normal attacks interactive. Instead of selecting attack and watching an animation, you have to time a sequence of button presses correctly as your character performs increasingly elaborate combos. Then there are the Dragoon transformations, which completely change the visual scale of battles and remain one of the game's defining features. It had the world, characters, music, and ambition to become a much bigger franchise. Unfortunately, that never happened. But the fan community has done an incredible job keeping the game alive. A huge thank you has to go to everyone involved with Severed Chains, the unofficial native PC port that has taken The Legend of Dragoon far beyond what was possible with the original PlayStation version. And I'm also really looking forward to seeing what Sunamods does with Echo S for The Legend of Dragoon. Sony may not have given us the remake yet, but luckily the community refuses to let this game disappear. At number 2 is Growlancer. This is easily one of the least known games on this list outside Japan, but for me it is particularly important because it started what became one of my favorite franchises. Growlancer doesn't use conventional turn-based battles or traditional grid-based strategy combat. Instead, battles happen in real time across large areas. You issue orders to your characters, control positioning, intercept enemies, and frequently have objectives that involve much more than simply killing everything on the screen. That design became one of the defining features of the Growlancer series. There are also choices, character relationships, and different outcomes that give you reasons to approach the story differently on another playthrough. Unfortunately, the original Growlancer never received an official English localization. There have been fan translation efforts, but this is a game that deserves a proper, polished English release so more people can experience where the series began. Even better, give us a Growlancer collection, because this is one JRPG franchise I desperately want to see return. And at number 1, Xenogears. There really couldn't be anything else. For me, Xenogears has one of the best stories ever told in a video game. Identity, religion, psychology, war, human nature, enormous mysteries spanning generations. It attempts things that most games wouldn't even dare to put into a single story. And somehow, beneath all that complexity, it still manages to have characters and emotional moments that make the story feel personal. The combat is memorable too. On foot, different button combinations create death blows, while gear battles completely change the scale of combat and give Xenogears another identity entirely. But we also know that the game's ambition eventually exceeded the circumstances under which it was being created. The second disc famously presents significant portions of the story in a much more condensed form. And that is exactly why, out of every game on this list, Xenogears is the one I want remade the most. Not because the original isn't worth playing, because the original is already extraordinary. A remake would have the opportunity to finally give every part of that story the presentation it deserves. Thankfully, the Xeno legacy didn't end with Xenogears. It continued through Xenosaga and eventually Xenoblade Chronicles, and the Xeno games remain some of my favorite JRPGs. In fact, I genuinely can't think of a Xeno game I've played that I didn't like. But Xenogears is where that journey began for me, and more than 25 years later, I'm still waiting for Square Enix to finally bring it back. Those are my 10 PlayStation JRPGs that I think deserve far more attention. And honestly, narrowing the PlayStation library down to only 10 games wasn't easy. So now I want to hear yours. Which PlayStation JRPG would you put at number 1? And which forgotten series would you most like to see receive a remake, remaster, or completely new game? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more videos about games that deserve another chance, like and subscribe. It will help me continue making videos like this.